There is a cartoon that most people think of as a harmless, colorful comedy about a blue cat and his goldfish brother living in a suburban town. A cartoon that airs on Cartoon Network, a channel designed for children. A cartoon with bright animation, silly voices, and episodes that run for exactly 11 minutes each. And yet this cartoon has been banned in over a dozen countries. It has been censored in nearly every region where it airs. It has pushed boundaries that most children's shows would not even acknowledge exist, let alone attempt to cross. It has dealt with themes of sexuality, substance use, cross-dressing, violence, existential dread, body horror, and the deliberate subversion of the very medium it exists within. That cartoon is The Amazing World of Gumball. And tonight, we are going to talk about the moments that got it into trouble, the moments that made parents nervous, the moments that got entire episodes pulled from networks, and the moments that proved, beyond any reasonable doubt, that Gumball was one of the bravest, most honest, and most important animated shows ever created. Now let me be clear about something before we begin. This is not a video about outrage. This is not about pointing fingers or declaring that the show went too far. What makes Gumball's controversial moments so fascinating is not that they exist, but why they exist. Each time the show pushed a boundary, it did so for a reason. There was always a point being made, a question being asked, a truth being told that could not have been told any other way. So settle in, get comfortable, and let us explore the moments that proved The Amazing World of Gumball was never just a children's cartoon. The Amazing World of Gumball has been censored in Africa, Australia, Brazil, Bulgaria, Croatia, the Czech Republic, Denmark, France, Germany, Hungary, India, Ireland, Italy, Japan, Latin America, the Middle East, and North Africa, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Norway, the Philippines, Poland, Portugal, Romania, Russia, Serbia, Slovenia, Southeast Asia, South Korea, Spain, Sweden, Taiwan, Turkey, the United Kingdom, and the United States. That is essentially every market where the show airs. There is not a single region in the world where Gumball has gone completely uncensored, and the reasons for censorship vary dramatically from region to region. This is itself revealing. What one culture considers dangerous, another considers harmless. What one country bans outright, another airs without comment. The map of Gumball's censorship is, in effect, a map of the world's anxieties. It shows us what different cultures are afraid of. And those fears tell us far more about the cultures than they tell us about the show. Before we examine specific controversies, let us consider the broader context in which Gumball's boundary pushing occurred. When Gumball premiered in 2011, the cultural landscape was different from what it is today. Marriage equality had not yet been legalized in the United States. The broader conversation about gender identity was still in its early stages. Social media was becoming dominant, but had not yet become the primary medium through which young people constructed their identities. By the time Gumball ended in 2019, all of these things had changed dramatically, and Gumball changed with them. It began as a show that occasionally pushed boundaries and ended as a show actively participating in the cultural redefinition of what children's media could and should be. The media theorist Marshall McLuhan argued that the medium is the message. Television, by its nature, tends toward consensus. It seeks the largest possible audience. It avoids controversy because controversy reduces viewership. Gumball resisted this tendency. It used animated comedy to deliver messages that children's cartoons are not supposed to deliver. It used the familiar, comfortable form of a funny cartoon to smuggle genuinely challenging ideas past the defenses that audiences and censors use to keep those ideas out. This is what the great satirists have always understood. Jonathan Swift did not write dry philosophical treatises about poverty. He wrote A Modest Proposal, a satirical essay suggesting eating children as a solution to hunger. The absurdity made the seriousness impossible to ignore. Gumball operates on the same principle. The absurdity of a blue cartoon cat makes the underlying seriousness of the show's themes impossible to dismiss. The philosopher Michel Foucault wrote extensively about the relationship between power and censorship. Foucault argued that censorship does not simply suppress content, it produces content. The act of declaring something unspeakable makes it fascinating. The act of banning something makes it desirable. Every banned Gumball episode became more famous for being banned than it ever would have been for its content alone. The censorship transformed modest episodes into statements about what we are allowed to see, think, and discuss. There is also the question of why certain controversies resonate more strongly than others. When Gumball depicted a character in a dress, the response was immediate and severe in certain markets. But when Gumball depicted the existential horror of the void, a concept that is arguably more disturbing than any wardrobe choice, the response was minimal. This asymmetry tells us something important about the nature of cultural anxiety. We are most afraid of the things that challenge our categories. Gender is a category. Sexuality is a category. These categories feel fundamental, natural, and immutable. When a show suggests that they are not, when it depicts a character crossing a category boundary with casual ease, the response is visceral and often disproportionate to the actual content. Existential dread, by contrast, is not a category violation. It is a universal human experience. It does not threaten our way of organizing the world. It threatens our sense of meaning within that world, which is a different kind of threat, and one that most cultures are better equipped to handle. This is why Gumball's gender-related episodes were banned, while its existentially terrifying episodes were merely censored. The gender episodes challenged the categories. The existential episodes challenged the meaning. And for most cultures, the categories are more sacred than the meaning. The philosopher Thomas Kuhn wrote about paradigm shifts in science, the moments when an entire framework for understanding the world is replaced by a new one. Kuhn noted that paradigm shifts are always resisted, often violently, because the people who have built their lives and careers within the old paradigm experience the shift as an existential threat. They do not just lose their theory, they lose their world. Gumball's most controversial episodes function as micro-paradigm shifts. They present the audience with a way of seeing the world that is incompatible with their current framework. A father in a dress, two boys hugging, a child confronting the meaninglessness of existence. Each of these moments requires the audience to adjust their framework, however slightly, to accommodate what they are seeing. And that adjustment, however small, is the beginning of a paradigm shift. The censors who banned these episodes were, in Kuhn's terms, defending the old paradigm. They were trying to prevent the shift, and like all such efforts, they were ultimately futile, because the shift was not happening in the episodes. It was happening in the audience. And you cannot censor a mind that has already been changed. Now, with that context established, let us examine the specific controversies in detail. Let us start with one of the most frequently banned categories of content in the amazing world of Gumball: romance and sexuality. Gumball is, among other things, a show about growing up. Its characters are roughly 12 years old. They are at an age where awareness of romance, attraction, and the confusing dynamics of interpersonal relationships is just beginning to emerge. Most children's shows handle this period of development with extreme caution, limiting romantic content to innocent crushes, hand-holding, and the occasional embarrassed blush. Gumball went further. The relationship between Gumball Watterson and Penny Fitzgerald is, by the standards of children's animation, remarkably physical and emotionally complex. They kiss on screen. They embrace with genuine tenderness. They look at each other with an intensity that goes well beyond the typical cartoon crush. They have conflicts that are rooted in real emotional dynamics: jealousy, insecurity, fear of rejection, the struggle to be vulnerable with another person. The show does not sexualize these moments. It handles them with care and respect, but it also refuses to sanitize them. It presents young romance as what it actually is: messy, confusing, exhilarating, and sometimes painful. It trusts its audience, many of whom are experiencing these exact feelings for the first time, to handle an honest depiction of what they are going through. This honesty bothered censors in multiple regions. The episode The Romantic, in which Darwin plans an elaborate date for Carrie, was banned in the Middle East and North Africa. The episode The Girlfriend, which explored Darwin's relationship with Jamie, was similarly restricted. The reasoning was straightforward. Children should not see other children experiencing romantic feelings on screen, but Gumball pushed back against this reasoning simply by existing. By depicting young romance with honesty and respect, the show validated the experiences of millions of viewers who were beginning to navigate the confusing world of first crushes and early relationships. It said, "What you are feeling is real. It is not shameful. It is not inappropriate. It is a natural and important part of growing up." The philosopher Martha Nussbaum has argued that emotions are not irrational disruptions of thought, but forms of intelligent awareness. Love, jealousy, fear, excitement, these are not obstacles to understanding. They are ways of understanding. By depicting the full emotional range of young romance, Gumball was not corrupting its audience. It was educating them. It was giving them emotional vocabulary for experiences they were already having, but might not yet know how to name. The show's treatment of gender expression generated even more controversy. The episode The Lady, in which Richard Watterson dresses as a woman to attend a secret social group, was banned in the Middle East, Turkey, and parts of Asia. In some markets, it was not just banned from broadcast, but actively removed from streaming platforms, as though the mere existence of a cartoon character in a dress was dangerous enough to warrant complete erasure. What makes this censorship so revealing is that the episode itself is fundamentally about loneliness, not gender. Richard dresses as a woman because he wants friends. He wants to belong to a group. He wants the kind of intimate, supportive social connection that he does not have in his daily life. The dress is not a political statement. It is a disguise, a means to an end. And the show treats it with the kind of casual acceptance that communicates, more powerfully than any lecture could, that this is not a big deal. But for censors in multiple countries, it was a very big deal. And the gap between the show's casual treatment of the subject and the censor's alarm is itself a form of social commentary. The show presented something ordinary. Certain cultures responded as though it was extraordinary. And that response tells us far more about those cultures than it tells us about the show. The philosopher Judith Butler has written extensively about gender performativity, the idea that gender is not something we are, but something we do. We perform masculinity or femininity through repeated actions, gestures, and choices. Butler argues that these performances are so deeply ingrained that we mistake them for nature, forgetting that they are, at every level, constructed. The Lady is a perfect illustration of Butler's theory. Richard performs femininity, and he does it convincingly enough to be accepted. The episode reveals that the boundaries between masculine and feminine are not as solid as we pretend they are. A father, a husband, a man can put on a dress and become, at least in social terms, a woman. The categories are not fixed. They are fluid, and that fluidity is not threatening. It is simply true. The fact that this truth was considered dangerous enough to ban tells us something profound about the cultural investment in maintaining rigid gender categories. The show revealed the constructedness of gender, and the censors responded by trying to reconstruct the wall the show had dismantled. They banned the episode, not because it was harmful, but because it was honest. And honesty, when it challenges deeply held assumptions, is always the most dangerous thing. The episode The Hug was banned in the Middle East and North Africa for what censors described as homosexual innuendos. The episode involves Hot Dog Guy and Gumball becoming trapped in an awkward hug that neither of them knows how to end. It is, at its core, a comedy about social awkwardness, about the unwritten rules that govern physical contact between males, and about the absurd lengths to which people will go to avoid appearing intimate with someone of the same gender. The episode is not about homosexuality. It is about homophobia. It is about the fear that drives men to avoid any physical contact that might be interpreted as romantic. It is about the damage that fear does to male friendships, male emotional expression, and male mental health. The episode is, if anything, a critique of the very anxiety that led to its being banned. It says, "Look at how absurd this is. Look at how two people who accidentally touched each other are willing to destroy their lives rather than be seen as intimate." The censors who banned the episode proved its point more effectively than the episode itself could have. By declaring that a hug between two male cartoon characters was too dangerous to broadcast, they demonstrated exactly the kind of irrational fear that the episode was satirizing. The censorship became part of the text. It completed the episode's argument by providing a real-world example of the very phenomenon it was critiquing. The episode The Slap was banned in the Middle East, Turkey, and parts of Eastern Europe for similar reasons. The episode involves Tobias slapping characters on their backsides, a gag that has existed in physical comedy since the earliest days of theater. But in the context of male characters touching other male characters, the gesture was interpreted as sexually suggestive, and the episode was pulled. There is a pattern here that is worth naming explicitly. In every case where Gumball was censored for perceived homosexual content, the actual content was not sexual. It was physical. Two men hugging, a hand touching a backside. Characters standing too close together. The censors were not responding to sex. They were responding to proximity. The mere suggestion that male bodies could exist near each other in a non-aggressive context was enough to trigger alarm. This tells us something important about the cultural construction of masculinity. In many societies, male identity is defined, at least in part, by distance. Distance from femininity, distance from vulnerability, distance from other male bodies. The rules are unwritten, but enforced with extraordinary vigor. And when a children's cartoon violates those rules, even in the context of obvious comedy, the response is swift and severe. Gumball violated these rules deliberately and consistently. It depicted male characters who were emotionally open, physically affectionate, and comfortable with vulnerability. Gumball and Darwin tell each other they love each other. They hug. They hold hands in moments of fear. They cry. They express feelings that traditional masculinity demands they suppress. This is, in the quietest possible way, revolutionary, not because it makes a political statement, but because it normalizes emotional openness between males. It shows boys being friends in the fullest, most emotionally authentic sense of the word, and it does so without irony, without embarrassment, and without the defensive humor that most shows deploy when male characters express genuine affection for each other. There is another dimension to Gumball's treatment of gender and identity that deserves extended discussion, and that is the way the show depicted families that do not fit the traditional mold. The Watterson family itself is unusual. Darwin is adopted. He is a goldfish who grew legs and was absorbed into the family, not through legal processes, but through love. Anais, the youngest child, is exponentially more intelligent than either of her parents or her older brother, creating a dynamic where the traditional hierarchy of wisdom in a family is inverted. Nicole is the primary breadwinner and the family's protector, physically stronger and more competent than her husband. Richard is a stay-at-home father who contributes nothing in economic terms, but provides a kind of emotional warmth that the family depends on. This is not a conventional family, and the show never pretends that it is. It acknowledges the strangeness of the Watterson arrangement, while simultaneously arguing that the strangeness does not matter. What matters is the love. What matters is the commitment. What matters is the daily, unglamorous work of showing up for each other. In a media landscape where family structures are still overwhelmingly depicted as nuclear, heterosexual, and conventional, Gumball's Wattersons are a quiet revolution. They suggest that family is not defined by biology or tradition or structure. It is defined by choice, by the decision to care for someone even when caring is difficult, inconvenient, or irrational. The show extended this philosophy beyond the Wattersons. Throughout the series, we see a wide variety of family structures in Elmore. Single parents, absent parents, parents who are objects rather than living beings, characters who have no parents at all and have built families from friendships. The show presents all of these arrangements with the same casual acceptance, refusing to privilege any single model of family over any other. This refusal to judge is itself controversial, because it implies that the traditional family structure is not inherently superior to any other. It implies that a goldfish can be a brother, that a piece of toast can be a father, that love, rather than biology, is the foundation of family. And while most viewers would agree with this sentiment in the abstract, seeing it depicted so matter-of-factly in a children's cartoon made some people profoundly uncomfortable. The philosopher Jacques Derrida wrote about what he called supplementarity, the way in which things that are supposedly secondary or supplementary actually turn out to be essential. Darwin is, in the traditional family structure, a supplement. He is not a biological child. He is an addition, an extra, a goldfish who was never supposed to be part of the family. And yet Darwin is essential. Without him, the Watterson family does not function. Without him, Gumball has no best friend, Nicole has no second son, and the show has no heart. The supplement has become the center. The addition has become the foundation. This is Derrida in cartoon form. The thing that was supposed to be marginal turns out to be the most important thing of all. And the show makes this point not through argument, but through depiction. We see Darwin's importance in every episode. We feel it. And by the time we stop to think about it, the philosophical work has already been done. Let us talk about something that is often overlooked in discussions of Gumball's controversies, but that I think is fundamental. The show's treatment of class and economic inequality. Gumball's world is not economically equal. Some characters are wealthy, some are poor, some have stable jobs, some are unemployed. And the show depicts these differences with an honesty that is unusual in children's animation, where economic reality is typically either ignored entirely or presented in the most sanitized possible terms. The Watterson family is not wealthy. Nicole works hard at a job that is never clearly defined, but that clearly exhausts her. Richard is unemployed and, the show suggests, essentially unemployable. The family's financial situation is precarious, a fact that is referenced repeatedly throughout the series and that occasionally becomes the central focus of an episode. The episode The Bumpkin from Season 2 explored rural poverty through the character of Idaho, a potato from a farming community. Idaho invites Gumball and Darwin to visit his family's farm, where they discover a way of life that is radically different from their suburban existence. The farm is poor, the facilities are basic, the work is backbreaking, and the family is happy, or at least content, in a way that confuses Gumball, who cannot understand how anyone could be content with so little. This episode is controversial, not because it depicts poverty, which many children's shows do, but because it refuses to judge poverty. It does not present Idaho's family as objects of pity. It does not suggest that they need to be rescued or improved. It presents them as people who have made different choices and who experience different satisfactions. It suggests that the suburban, consumer-driven lifestyle that Gumball takes for granted is not the only valid way to live. The philosopher Pierre Bourdieu wrote about cultural capital, the non-financial assets that give people social advantages, things like education, knowledge, taste, and social connections. Bourdieu argued that the distribution of cultural capital is just as unequal as the distribution of financial capital, and that the two forms of inequality reinforce each other in ways that are largely invisible. Gumball depicts this invisible inequality with remarkable clarity. The wealthy characters in Elmore, like Masami, the cloud whose father owns the rainbow factory, have access to resources, opportunities, and social connections that poorer characters do not. These advantages are never earned. They are inherited. And the show, through its depictions of the social dynamics at Elmore Junior High, shows how wealth translates into social power in ways that are both obvious and subtle. The episode The Egg from Season 3 explored the relationship between economic class and social behavior. In it, Nicole tries to befriend Felicity, a wealthy mother whose politeness masks a deep condescension toward the Wattersons' lower economic status. The episode depicts class anxiety with painful accuracy, showing how the desire to be accepted by wealthier people can lead to self-compromise, shame, and the abandonment of one's own values. For young viewers who may not yet have the vocabulary to describe class dynamics, episodes like The Egg provide a framework for understanding experiences they have already had. The feeling of being judged for what you wear, where you live, or what your parents do for a living. The feeling of not quite fitting in among people who have more than you. The subtle, pervasive shame that economic inequality produces in the people at its lower end. These are real experiences for millions of children, and Gumball's willingness to depict them honestly is both controversial and necessary. Controversial because it acknowledges that the world is unfair in ways that most children's media prefers to ignore. Necessary because children who experience this unfairness deserve to see it reflected in the stories they consume. The show also explored the psychological effects of consumerism on young people. The episode The Sale from Season 5 depicted the Wattersons' home being invaded by marketers who manipulate their desires and exploit their insecurities to sell them products they do not need. The episode is a satire of advertising culture, but it is also a genuinely disturbing depiction of the way consumer capitalism penetrates the most intimate spaces of our lives. For children, who are the primary targets of advertising culture, this episode is particularly powerful. It tells them, in terms they can understand, that the people trying to sell them things are not their friends, that the desires they feel when they see advertisements are not natural, that they are being manipulated, systematically and deliberately, by industries that profit from their insecurity. This is, again, a message that most children's shows would never deliver, because most children's shows exist within the very system they would need to critique. They are funded by advertising. They generate revenue through merchandise sales. They are products of the consumer economy, and they depend on that economy for their existence. Gumball existed within this system too. It generated merchandise. It was funded by a network that made money from advertising to children. But it also critiqued the system from within, pointing out its manipulations and its absurdities even while participating in them. This contradiction, this willingness to bite the hand that feeds it, is one of the most controversial and most admirable things about the show. The philosopher Slavoj Zizek has argued that the most effective critique of capitalism comes not from outside the system, but from within it. A critique delivered by someone who has opted out of consumer culture is easy to dismiss. A critique delivered by someone who participates in consumer culture, who understands its seductions and its traps from the inside, is far more powerful. Gumball's critique of consumerism has this power because the show is itself a consumer product. It knows the system from the inside, and it uses that knowledge to expose the system's contradictions with a precision that an outsider could never achieve. Let us also talk about Gumball's controversial depiction of the internet and digital culture, because this is an area where the show was ahead of its time in ways that now seem almost prophetic. The episode The Safety from Season 4 explored surveillance culture by having Darwin become obsessed with monitoring everyone in Elmore to prevent potential harm. He installs cameras everywhere. He tracks everyone's movements. He creates a system of total surveillance that he believes is for everyone's benefit. The episode premiered years before the widespread public awareness of mass surveillance programs, before the debates about facial recognition technology, before the controversies about social media companies tracking their users. And yet it predicted, with remarkable accuracy, the way that the desire for safety can become a justification for total control. The way that good intentions can pave the road to dystopia. Darwin's surveillance state is presented as well-intentioned, but ultimately monstrous. He genuinely believes he is helping people. He genuinely wants to keep them safe. But the safety he creates comes at the cost of freedom, privacy, and autonomy. The citizens of Elmore are safe, but they are not free. They are protected, but they are not human. This is a critique that has become only more relevant with time. We live in a world where surveillance technology is becoming ubiquitous, where governments and corporations track our movements, our communications, and our purchasing habits in the name of safety and convenience. The Amazing World of Gumball saw this coming and asked, in the clearest possible terms, whether the trade-off was worth it. The episode, The Boredom from Season 3, explored a different aspect of digital culture. In it, Gumball and Darwin are bored and start people-watching, observing the lives of Elmore's citizens through a window. What they see is a series of interconnected stories, small dramas, and comedies playing out simultaneously across the town. The episode is structured like a social media feed, short, disconnected narratives, glimpses into other people's lives, the illusion of intimacy without actual connection. Gumball and Darwin watch, but do not participate. They observe, but do not engage. They are, in effect, scrolling through the lives of their neighbors, the way we scroll through our feeds. The episode does not condemn this behavior. It presents it as what it is, a way of passing time, a way of feeling connected without the risk of actual connection. But it also shows what is lost when observation replaces participation. Gumball and Darwin learn things about their neighbors that they would never have discovered through actual interaction, but they also remain alone, separated from the world they are watching by a pane of glass. This metaphor for social media use was, in 2014 when the episode aired, ahead of the cultural conversation. It would take several more years for the broader public to begin grappling with the implications of a culture built on observation rather than participation. Gumball was already there, asking the questions that the rest of us would not think to ask until later. Let us now turn to the show's engagement with violence and horror, because this is another area where Gumball consistently pushed beyond the boundaries of what is expected from children's animation. The episode The Joy from Season 3 is perhaps the most striking example. In it, a virus spreads through Elmore Junior High that turns the infected into mindless joy zombies. They shamble through corridors with fixed, vacant grins. They chase uninfected characters with relentless, happy determination. The episode is shot in the style of found footage horror, complete with shaky camera work, degraded audio quality, and an atmosphere of mounting dread that is genuinely unsettling. The episode was censored in multiple markets. Scenes were cut for being too intense for young viewers, and the concerns were not unreasonable. Watching the episode, especially for a younger viewer, it is easy to forget that this is a cartoon. The horror feels real, but the horror serves a purpose. The Joy is not about zombies. It is about conformity. It is about the way happiness, when it is imposed rather than chosen, becomes something monstrous. The Joy zombies are not evil. They are happy, relentlessly, inescapably, mandatorily happy. And that mandatory happiness is presented as more terrifying than any traditional monster. This is a profound and important message, especially for young viewers who are growing up in a culture that increasingly demands visible happiness. Social media, school culture, advertising, parenting philosophies, all of these forces conspire to create an environment where negative emotions are treated as problems to be solved rather than experiences to be felt. Sadness is medicalized. Anger is pathologized. Anxiety is disorders. The message, repeated from every direction, is that you should be happy. And if you are not happy, something is wrong with you. The Joy pushes back against this message with the force of a horror film. It says that mandatory happiness is not just unpleasant. It is terrifying. It is dehumanizing. It is, in the most literal sense, a kind of possession, a force that takes over your body and your mind and replaces your authentic emotional experience with a manufactured smile. There is another horror-adjacent episode that deserves detailed examination. The episode Halloween, from Season 4, is one of the show's annual Halloween specials, and it pushes the boundaries of children's horror further than almost any other episode in the series. In this episode, the citizens of Elmore discover that they are, and have always been, ghosts. The revelation recontextualizes every event in the show's history. Everything we have watched, every comedy, every drama, every relationship, has been occurring among beings who are already dead. The implications are staggering, and the show allows those implications to land with full force before pulling back into comedy. This is existential horror of the highest order. The idea that you might already be dead, that your entire life might be a kind of afterlife that you have been experiencing without awareness, is the kind of concept that keeps philosophers awake at night. The fact that Gumball introduced this concept in a children's Halloween special and treated it with genuine seriousness before diffusing it with humor demonstrates the show's remarkable ability to oscillate between lightness and depth within a single episode. The episode The Puppets from Season 4 ventures into psychological horror. In it, Darwin becomes obsessed with a children's puppet show called The Muppets, which is depicted as having a hypnotic, almost cult-like influence on those who watch it. The puppets speak directly to Darwin. They invite him to join them. They promise a world that is simpler, safer, and more comfortable than the one he currently inhabits. The episode is a meditation on the seductive power of regression, on the temptation to retreat into a childlike state when the complexities of growing up become overwhelming. The puppets represent every comforting lie that adulthood tempts us to believe, that we can go back, that we can return to a time when things were simple, that we can escape the burden of consciousness by surrendering to something warm and mindless and safe. Darwin almost succumbs. The pull of the puppets is strong, and the episode treats it as genuinely dangerous rather than as a simple joke. The message is clear. The desire for comfort, taken to its extreme, becomes a desire for oblivion. The desire for simplicity, taken to its extreme, becomes a desire to stop thinking. And stopping thinking, however appealing it might seem in moments of exhaustion and overwhelm, is a form of death. The episode The Loophole from Season 4 explored the relationship between rules and morality through the character of Bobert, the robot. Bobert is programmed to follow rules absolutely. When he discovers loopholes in those rules, he exploits them without any moral consideration, because morality is not part of his programming. Only rules are. The result is chaos. Bobert's literal adherence to the letter of the law, combined with his complete disregard for its spirit, produces outcomes that are both hilarious and frightening. He hurts people without technically breaking any rules. He causes destruction while remaining technically compliant. He demonstrates, with mechanical precision, the difference between following rules and being good. This is a profound philosophical point. The ethicist Larry Alexander has argued that rules are, at best, rough approximations of moral principles. They can never capture the full complexity of ethical decision-making. A person who follows rules without understanding the moral principles behind them is not ethical. They are merely compliant. And compliance, as Bobert demonstrates, can produce outcomes that are deeply, fundamentally wrong. The episode is controversial, not because it depicts violence or sexuality, but because it challenges the very foundation of how most children are taught to behave. Children are taught to follow rules. They are told that rule following is equivalent to being good. Gumball questions this equivalence and suggests that genuine goodness requires something more than compliance. It requires judgment, empathy, and the willingness to think for yourself about what is right and what is wrong, even when the rules do not provide a clear answer. There is a particular kind of violence in Gumball that is more disturbing than the physical slapstick, and that is emotional violence. The show depicts characters hurting each other emotionally with a precision and a realism that is genuinely unsettling. The relationship between Gumball and Squidward has its parallel in Gumball's world. Characters are cruel to each other, not in the straightforward, cartoonish way of most animated shows, where a character is hit with an anvil and recovers immediately. In a real way. They say things that hurt. They exploit vulnerabilities. They betray trust. And the show depicts the aftermath of these emotional wounds with an honesty that most children's shows would consider too dark. The episode The Burden from Season 3 explored the consequences of neglect. Gumball and Darwin are given responsibility for the class pet and fail to care for it. The pet does not simply bounce back. It suffers. And the show forces its audience to witness that suffering, to feel the weight of it, to understand that neglect has real consequences for the beings we are supposed to care for. The episode The Mothers from Season 4 depicted mothers competing with each other in ways that were both hilarious and deeply uncomfortable. The competition was not about who was the best mother in some idealized sense. It was about who could perform motherhood most convincingly while concealing the exhaustion, the resentment, and the quiet desperation that parenting often involves. This depiction of motherhood was controversial because it punctured the myth of the happy, fulfilled mother who finds complete satisfaction in her role. The mothers in Gumball are tired. They are frustrated. They love their children, but they are also burdened by them, and the show refuses to pretend otherwise. For young viewers whose mothers may be experiencing these exact feelings, this episode provides a crucial form of validation. It says, "Your mother is not perfect. She is not always happy. She struggles. And that does not mean she does not love you. It means she is human, and humans struggle. And love and struggle are not opposites. They are companions." The episode The Saint from Season 3 explored the limits of goodness through the character of Alan, the balloon. Alan is relentlessly positive, kind, and generous. He never has a bad word for anyone. He forgives every transgression. He turns every negative into a positive. Gumball finds this infuriating. He cannot believe that anyone could genuinely be that good. So he sets out to break Alan, to find the darkness that must be hiding beneath the surface of his relentless positivity. He insults Alan. He sabotages him. He tests him in every way he can think of. And Alan does not break. He remains kind. He remains positive. He remains good. This episode is controversial because it raises an uncomfortable question. What if some people really are just good? What if their goodness is not a performance, or a mask, or a defense mechanism? What if it is simply who they are? And if that is the case, what does our inability to accept it say about us? The episode suggests that we are deeply uncomfortable with genuine goodness, that when we encounter it, our first instinct is not to celebrate it, but to test it, to probe it, to try to find the flaw. Because if someone else can be genuinely good, it means that our own failures of goodness are not inevitable. It means we have a choice. And that choice, the choice to be good in a world that does not require it, is both the most admirable thing a person can do and the most threatening thing a person can be. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche wrote about what he called the slave morality, the tendency of those who are unable to achieve power to redefine goodness as weakness. If you cannot be strong, you declare strength a vice. If you cannot be ambitious, you declare ambition a sin. Nietzsche saw this inversion as the foundation of Western morality, and he was deeply suspicious of it. Gumball's treatment of Alan can be read through a Nietzschean lens. Gumball's inability to accept Alan's goodness is, at least in part, a reflection of his own discomfort with his failure to be equally good. Rather than admiring Alan, he resents him. Rather than aspiring to Alan's standard, he tries to drag Alan down to his own. This is the slave morality in action. And the show depicts it not as a philosophical abstraction, but as a lived experience. One that many of its viewers will recognize from their own lives. The episode The Pest from Season 4 tackled bullying with an honesty that surprised many viewers. Rather than presenting a simple anti-bullying message, the show explored the complex dynamics of power, shame, and complicity that make bullying possible. It showed that bullying is not just the act of one bad person. It is a system, maintained by bystanders who choose not to intervene, by institutions that choose not to see, and by a culture that rewards dominance and punishes vulnerability. The episode refused to offer the standard anti-bullying solution of standing up to the bully. Instead, it showed that standing up to a bully is only possible when the systems that enable bullying are also challenged. The teacher who pretends not to see. The classmates who watch but do not act. The school administration that treats bullying as a personal conflict between individuals rather than a systemic failure of the institution. This systemic view of bullying was controversial because it distributed responsibility. It said that bullying is not just the bully's fault. It is everyone's fault. Everyone who sees it and does nothing. Everyone who benefits from the social order that bullying maintains. Everyone who is grateful that the bully is targeting someone else instead of them. For young viewers who have experienced bullying, this episode offered something more valuable than the usual advice to be brave and stand up for yourself. It offered understanding. It said, this is not just happening to you. It is happening because of a system, and systems can be changed. Not by one person standing up to one bully, but by a community deciding that the system needs to change. The philosopher Hannah Arendt wrote about the banality of evil, the way that ordinary people, through passive compliance with unjust systems, become complicit in harm they never intended. Arendt was writing about the Holocaust, but her insight applies to any situation where systems produce harm and individuals choose not to resist. Gumball applied Arendt's insight to the schoolyard. It showed that the ordinary bystander, the child who watches bullying happen and does nothing, is not innocent. They are participating in the system. Their silence is consent. Their inaction is action, and the harm that results is partly theirs. This is a heavy message for a children's show, but it is a true one, and truth, however heavy, is always lighter than the alternative, which is the continued ignorance that allows harmful systems to persist unchallenged. The episode The Detective from Season 4 explored the relationship between truth and power in the context of a mystery plot. Anais, the youngest Watterson and the most intelligent, investigates a crime that has occurred within the family. Her investigation reveals uncomfortable truths about each family member, truths that they would prefer to keep hidden. The episode raises questions about the ethics of investigation. Is it always right to seek the truth? What if the truth damages the people you love? What if the truth, once uncovered, cannot be unknown? Is ignorance, in some cases, genuinely better than knowledge? These are questions that the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche grappled with throughout his career. Nietzsche argued that the will to truth, the relentless desire to know, is not always healthy. Sometimes it is destructive. Sometimes the truth is something that a person, or a family, or a society is not equipped to handle. And forcing truth upon people who are not ready for it is a form of violence, however well-intentioned. Anais's investigation in The Detective is well-intentioned. She wants to solve the crime. She wants justice. But her relentless pursuit of truth causes pain to the people she loves. The episode does not resolve this tension cleanly. It acknowledges that truth and kindness are sometimes in conflict, and that navigating this conflict requires wisdom rather than rules. This nuanced treatment of the relationship between truth and harm is characteristic of Gumball's approach to ethical questions. The show never offers simple moral prescriptions. It presents dilemmas. It shows the costs of different choices. And it trusts its audience to think through the implications for themselves. The episode The Slide from Season 4 explored online dating and the gap between digital personas and real identities. Rocky, a minor character, tries online dating and discovers that the person he has been talking to is not who they claim to be. The episode handles this revelation with surprising sensitivity, exploring the loneliness that drives people to create false identities online, and the genuine hurt that results when those identities are exposed. For young viewers who are increasingly forming relationships in digital spaces, this episode provides essential guidance about the risks of online interaction. But it does so without scaremongering. It does not present the internet as a dangerous place full of predators. It presents it as a complicated place full of lonely people who are trying, sometimes dishonestly, to connect. And it suggests that the solution is not to avoid online interaction, but to approach it with awareness, honesty, and a willingness to see the person behind the profile. The episode The Nobody from Season 3 introduced body horror elements that were genuinely disturbing. The character of Rob, having escaped from the void, appeared physically damaged, glitched, incomplete. Parts of his body were missing or distorted. His voice was fragmented. He was, visually, a being who had been broken and imperfectly reassembled. This visual horror was not gratuitous. It was a representation of what happens to a person who has been forgotten, abandoned, erased from the story that everyone else gets to be part of. Rob's physical damage is a metaphor for psychological damage, for the way that marginalization and erasure leave visible, lasting marks on the people who experience them. The show did not shy away from showing this damage. It did not sanitize Rob's appearance or soften his pain. It presented him as he was, broken and angry and desperate for recognition. And it trusted its audience to engage with the discomfort of seeing a character in genuine distress. Let us now discuss what is perhaps the most consistently controversial aspect of Gumball: its satire of institutions, systems, and authority. Throughout its run, Gumball maintained a deeply skeptical attitude toward authority in all its forms. Parents, teachers, police officers, politicians, media figures, religious leaders. No authority figure in Gumball's world was presented as consistently competent or trustworthy. This was not cynicism. It was realism. And it was, for a children's show, extraordinarily bold. The education system was a particular target. Elmore Junior High, the school where most of the children's storylines take place, was depicted as a factory for compliance rather than a center for learning. Teachers were shown to be burned out, incompetent, or actively hostile to their students' well-being. The curriculum was presented as irrelevant. Testing was depicted as a meaningless ritual. The entire institutional structure of education was portrayed as a system designed to process children rather than educate them. Miss Simeon, the Wattersons' teacher, embodies this critique. She is ancient, possibly millions of years old, and deeply exhausted. Her cruelty is not malice. It is the accumulated weight of centuries of thankless work in a system that does not value her or her students. She represents what happens when an institution grinds down the people within it until they have nothing left to give. The episode The Blame from Season 5 is Gumball's most direct statement about the relationship between media, censorship, and moral panic. In it, parents in Elmore blame video games for their children's behavioral problems. The resulting moral panic leads to a ban on video games, which quickly escalates to a ban on all potentially influential media, which eventually results in a complete suppression of creative expression. The episode is a satire of every media panic in history, from comic books in the 1950s, to rock music in the 1980s, to video games in the 2000s, to social media today. Each panic follows the same pattern. A complex social problem is blamed on a simple media scapegoat. The scapegoat is banned or restricted. The underlying social problem persists because it was never actually caused by the scapegoat in the first place. And meanwhile, creative expression is diminished, and the freedom of young people to engage with challenging content is curtailed. The show is defending itself. It is saying, out loud, that the impulse to protect children from difficult content is often motivated not by genuine concern, but by adults' desire to avoid difficult conversations. It is arguing that censorship does not protect children. It patronizes them. It denies them the opportunity to engage with complex ideas at an age when they are most receptive to complexity. This is a remarkable thing for a children's show to argue. It is essentially making the case for its own right to exist in the form it has chosen. It is saying that shows like Gumball, shows that take risks, that push boundaries, that trust their audience with difficult material, are not just permissible. They are necessary. The show's engagement with existential themes represents another form of controversy, though this one is less about censorship and more about expectation. People do not expect children's cartoons to ask questions about the nature of reality, consciousness, and existence. When Gumball began asking these questions, it confused and unsettled some viewers who felt that such themes had no place in children's programming. The void, which we have discussed extensively in the context of the show's evolution, is fundamentally an existential concept. It is the place where things that have been deemed unnecessary cease to exist. It is oblivion. It is non-being. And the show treats it with the seriousness that such a concept deserves, presenting it as genuinely terrifying rather than as a comedic inconvenience. The episode The Question from Season 4 asked, quite directly, what the meaning of life is. Characters offered different answers, from the hedonistic to the spiritual to the nihilistic, and the show refused to endorse any single answer. It presented the question as what it actually is, a question without a definitive answer, and trusted its audience to sit with the discomfort of that uncertainty. The episode The Void itself forced characters to confront the arbitrary nature of their own existence. Things were erased not because they did anything wrong, but because a higher power decided they were no longer needed. This is a brutal truth about the nature of fictional existence, but it is also a metaphor for the brutal truth about real existence. Things end. People are forgotten. Relevance is temporary. And no amount of effort or goodness guarantees that you will be remembered. These themes are not inappropriate for children. They are essential for children. Because children are already aware that the world is uncertain, that things change, that people disappear. They experience these realities every day, in the form of moving to new schools, losing friends, watching family dynamics shift, and confronting the growing awareness that the world is not as simple or as safe as they once believed. What Gumball did was acknowledge these realities, rather than pretend they did not exist. It said to its audience, "We know you are already thinking about these things. We know you are already confused and sometimes frightened. And instead of telling you not to worry, instead of offering false reassurance, we are going to sit with you in the uncertainty and help you find your own way through it." Before we move to the final category of controversy, let us examine some more episodes that generated heated discussion among parents and critics. The episode The Ape from Season 2 depicted Miss Simeon, the teacher, in a domestic setting, revealing that her life outside the classroom is lonely, pathetic, and deeply sad. She lives alone. She has no friends. Her home is depressing. Her evenings consist of watching television alone and eating meals that reflect the barrenness of her existence. This episode humanized a villain, which should not be controversial, but often is. Because when we see the humanity of people who have treated us badly, we are forced to complicate our judgment of them. We can no longer simply hate Miss Simeon. We have to acknowledge that she is a person, with a person's needs, a person's loneliness, and a person's capacity for suffering. And this complication is uncomfortable, because it is much easier to hate a cartoon villain than to empathize with a lonely woman. The show consistently refused to allow its audience the comfort of simple judgments. Every character who seemed purely negative was eventually revealed to have depth. Every situation that seemed straightforward was eventually shown to be complex. This refusal to simplify is, in a culture that increasingly demands simplification, one of the most controversial things a show can do. The episode The Spoiler from Season 5 explored the modern phenomenon of spoiler culture, the anxiety around having plot points revealed before you have had the chance to experience them yourself. The episode treats spoiler anxiety as a genuine form of distress, acknowledging that in a media-saturated culture, the ability to experience a story fresh is increasingly rare, and therefore increasingly valuable. But the episode also gently mocks the extremity of spoiler anxiety, pointing out that the terror of being spoiled is often disproportionate to the actual harm of knowing what happens. After all, the greatest stories in human history, from Homer to Shakespeare to the Bible, have been spoiled for generations. Knowing the ending does not necessarily diminish the journey. This balanced treatment of a contentious cultural issue is characteristic of Gumball's approach to controversy. The show does not take extreme positions. It does not declare that one side of a debate is right and the other is wrong. It presents both sides with empathy and humor, and it trusts its audience to navigate the space between them. The episode The Nuisance from Season 4 depicted the Wattersons being so disruptive to their neighborhood that the other citizens of Elmore attempt to have them deported to a different town. The episode is a thinly veiled commentary on gentrification and the displacement of communities, a topic that most children's shows would consider far too political to touch. The Wattersons are not displaced because they are bad people. They are displaced because they do not fit the standard that their neighbors want to maintain. They are too loud, too messy, too chaotic. They bring down property values. They disrupt the aesthetic. And so the community, acting through democratic processes, decides to remove them. This is exactly how gentrification works in real life. Communities are displaced, not through overt violence, but through the accumulated pressure of people who want their neighborhood to look a certain way, to sound a certain way, to contain a certain kind of person. The violence is systemic rather than personal. It operates through zoning laws and property taxes and community standards rather than through physical force. But it is violence nonetheless, and Gumball depicts it with a clarity that makes the violence visible. For young viewers who have experienced displacement, who have been told that they do not belong in a particular place or community, this episode provides a mirror. It says, what happened to you is real. It is not your fault. And the system that displaced you is not just, it is simply powerful. The episode The Weirdo from Season 5 explored nonconformity and the social consequences of being different. A new student arrives at Elmore Junior High who does not conform to any of the social expectations that govern student behavior. She is weird, not harmful, not disruptive, just genuinely, unapologetically weird. The episode follows the school's response to this nonconformity. First, curiosity, then fascination, then imitation, as other students begin copying her behavior, then backlash, as the novelty wears off and the social order reasserts itself. The trajectory is painfully realistic. Our culture celebrates nonconformity in the abstract, in advertisements, and inspirational posters and commencement speeches. But when actual nonconformity appears, the response is far less welcoming. The episode does not sentimentalize nonconformity. It does not present the weird student as a misunderstood genius or a secret hero. It presents her as simply different, and it traces the consequences of that difference with the precision of a social experiment. The conclusion is sobering. Being different is hard. Being accepted for your difference is rare. And the line between celebrated nonconformity and punished deviation is thinner than anyone wants to admit. The episode The Drama from Season 6 is perhaps the show's most direct engagement with the concept of emotional manipulation. In it, characters discover that certain people in Elmore are manufacturing drama, creating conflict and emotional distress for their own entertainment or social advantage. The episode is a remarkably accurate depiction of how social dynamics actually work, particularly among young people. Drama is not random. It is produced. Certain people create conflict because conflict gives them attention, power, and a sense of relevance. They manipulate others' emotions not out of malice, necessarily, but out of a need for stimulation, for significance, for the feeling that something is happening. For young viewers navigating the complex social world of school, this episode provides essential insight. It helps them understand that the drama they experience is not inevitable. It is created by specific people for specific reasons, and understanding those reasons is the first step toward refusing to participate. The episode The Cycle from Season 6 explored generational trauma, the way that patterns of behavior and emotional damage are transmitted from one generation to the next. Through the characters of Richard and his father, the episode showed how a parent's emotional failures create wounds in their children that those children then inflict on their own children, creating cycles of hurt that persist across generations. This is a heavy topic for any show, let alone a cartoon aimed at children. But it is also a topic of enormous importance. Many of the problems that young people face in their families, in their relationships, in their own emotional lives, have roots that extend back generations. Understanding these roots does not make the problems disappear, but it does make them comprehensible. And comprehension is the first step toward change. The episode depicted this cycle with compassion rather than judgment. The parents who fail their children are not presented as evil. They are presented as damaged, as people who are passing on wounds that were inflicted on them by people who were themselves wounded. The cycle is not a choice. It is a pattern, and patterns can be broken, but only when they are recognized. For young viewers who may be living within these cycles, who may be experiencing the consequences of generational patterns they do not yet understand, this episode offers something invaluable. It offers the possibility that the pattern can be seen, that it can be named, and that once it is named, it loses some of its power. Let us discuss one final category of controversy, and it is the one that I find most interesting. The show's systematic deconstruction of children's television as a medium. As Gumball progressed through its later seasons, it became increasingly critical of the very industry that produced it. It questioned the profit motives that drive children's programming. It satirized the focus group mentality that homogenizes creative content. It challenged the assumption that children need to be protected from complexity, ambiguity, and moral grayness. The episode, The Signal from Season 4, took the show's meta-awareness to a controversial extreme. In this episode, reality itself begins to glitch. Characters freeze mid-sentence. Scenes repeat. The audio cuts out. The visual quality degrades. It is as though the television signal carrying the show is malfunctioning, and the characters are trapped inside the malfunction. What makes this episode controversial is not its content, but its form. It deliberately creates a viewing experience that is confusing and disorienting. For young viewers, especially those watching alone, the effect could be genuinely alarming. The line between a show about a glitch and a show that is actually glitching becomes impossible to discern. And for a few unsettling minutes, the viewer is forced to question whether what they are watching is intentional or accidental, fiction or malfunction, art or error. This deliberate confusion is, in itself, a philosophical statement. It asks the audience to notice the medium through which they receive the show, to stop taking the signal for granted, to recognize that the stable, predictable experience of watching television is itself a kind of construction, one that can break down at any moment, revealing the chaos and fragility beneath the surface. The philosopher Martin Heidegger wrote about what he called the breakdown of equipment. Heidegger argued that we only notice the tools we use when they stop working. A hammer is invisible to us as long as it functions properly. We swing it without thinking, but when the handle breaks, suddenly the hammer becomes visible. We see it as an object for the first time. The breakdown reveals what normal functioning conceals. The signal performs a Heideggerian breakdown on television itself by making the show malfunction. By breaking the signal, it forces the viewer to see the medium, to notice the screen, the speakers, the transmission, all the invisible infrastructure that normally disappears behind the content it delivers. And in that moment of forced awareness, the viewer understands, perhaps for the first time, that what they are watching is not a window into another world. It is a signal, a constructed, transmitted, mediated signal that can be interrupted, distorted, or silenced at any time. The episode, The Scam from Season 3, tackled religion and supernatural belief in a way that generated significant discussion. In it, the characters create a fake ghost to scam candy from their classmates on Halloween. The scam works, but it also raises genuine questions about the nature of belief, the ethics of deception, and the relationship between faith and evidence. The episode does not mock religion directly. It is more subtle than that. It shows how beliefs can be manufactured, how evidence can be fabricated, how sincere faith can be the product of deliberate manipulation. It does not argue that all belief is manufactured, but it demonstrates the mechanism by which manufactured belief can be indistinguishable from genuine belief. And it trusts its audience to draw the appropriate conclusions. For young viewers who are beginning to develop their own relationship with questions of faith, evidence, and belief, this episode provides essential intellectual tools. It does not tell them what to believe. It shows them how beliefs are formed. It gives them the capacity for critical thinking about the sources of their own convictions, a capacity that will serve them well regardless of what they ultimately choose to believe. The episode The Stars from Season 5 explored the ethics of online rating and review culture. In it, characters discover that they can rate each other using a star system, and the ratings begin to determine social status, economic opportunity, and even personal relationships. Characters with high ratings thrive. Characters with low ratings are marginalized. The parallels to real social credit systems, to Uber ratings, to social media likes and followers are obvious and intentional. The episode premiered before the Black Mirror episode Nosedive, which explored a similar premise for an adult audience. Gumball got there first, and it got there with a target audience that was already living in a world where likes and followers were beginning to function as a form of social currency. The episode does not just criticize rating culture. It shows how it works, how the desire for approval drives conformity, how the fear of bad ratings stifles genuine expression, how a system designed to help people make better choices becomes a system of social control that punishes authenticity and rewards performance. For young viewers who are growing up within these systems, who are already measuring their worth in likes and followers and comments, this episode is not just relevant, it is urgent. It gives them a framework for understanding the forces that are shaping their behavior, forces that most adults are only beginning to recognize and that many adults still do not fully understand. The show did not just break the fourth wall, it interrogated it. It asked why the wall was there in the first place. It asked who benefits from the pretense that fictional characters are real. It asked what is lost when shows are designed to sell merchandise rather than to tell stories. These questions made some viewers uncomfortable, particularly adults who preferred to think of children's television as an uncomplicated good. The suggestion that the industry might be exploitative, that the colorful characters and catchy songs might be designed to sell products rather than to enrich lives, was not something that everyone wanted to hear, but it was true. And Gumball, characteristically, chose truth over comfort. It chose to tell its audience, including the youngest members of that audience, that the world is complicated, that the people who make things for you have their own motivations, which may not align with your interests, that you should think critically about the media you consume, even the media you love, especially the media you love. This is the most controversial thing Gumball ever did. Not showing a character in a dress, not depicting a hug between two male characters, not alluding to drugs, or depicting cartoon violence. The most controversial thing Gumball ever did was tell its audience to think for themselves, to question authority, to resist being told what to feel and what to believe. Because thinking for yourself is, in every era and every culture, the most dangerous thing a person can do. It threatens every system of power that depends on compliance. It undermines every institution that relies on unquestioning acceptance. It challenges every narrative that benefits from not being examined too closely. And a show that encourages thinking, genuine, critical, independent thinking, in millions of young minds across dozens of countries, is a show that has earned every ban, every censorship, and every worried editorial that has ever been written about it. The Amazing World of Gumball was controversial because it told the truth, not comfortable truths. Not the truths that make people feel good about themselves and their world. Hard truths. Uncomfortable truths. Truths about gender and sexuality and power and authority and the constructed nature of everything we take for granted. It told these truths to children, to young people who are still forming their understanding of the world, and it trusted them completely and without reservation to handle what they heard. That trust was not misplaced. The audience grew up. They became thoughtful, critical, creative adults who carry the lessons of a cartoon about a blue cat with them into a world that needs those lessons desperately. They learned that it is okay to question, that it is okay to be different, that the things that make people uncomfortable are often the things that matter most, and they learned it from a show that was willing to get banned for saying it. Let us consider one final theme that runs through all of Gumball's controversial moments, and that, I believe, explains why the show generated so much anxiety among adults while being so beloved by young people. That theme is trust. The fundamental difference between Gumball and most children's television is trust. Most children's shows do not trust their audience. They assume that children are fragile, that they need protection, that complex ideas and difficult emotions will damage them rather than develop them. They operate from a position of fear, the fear that showing a child something challenging will cause harm. Gumball operated from the opposite assumption. It assumed that children are resilient, that they are curious, that they want to be challenged, that they are capable of processing complex ideas, navigating moral ambiguity, and handling emotional intensity, as long as these things are presented with care, with humor, and with genuine respect for the audience's intelligence. This trust is the real source of the show's controversy, because when you trust children, you treat them like people. And when you treat children like people, you show them things that some adults would prefer they not see. Not because those things are harmful, but because they are real. And reality, in all its messy, complicated, sometimes frightening glory, is something that adults have been trying to keep from children since the beginning of organized society. The philosopher John Stuart Mill argued in his essay On Liberty that the only legitimate reason to restrict someone's freedom is to prevent harm to others. By this standard, most of Gumball's censorship is illegitimate. The show did not harm its audience. It challenged them. It made them think. It made them feel. It made them uncomfortable. And discomfort, however unpleasant, is not the same as harm. In fact, the philosopher Kierkegaard would argue that discomfort is essential to growth. That we only develop when we are pushed beyond our comfort zones. That the easy, comfortable, unchallenging life is not a life at all, but a form of slow death. Gumball pushed its audience beyond their comfort zones. It did so deliberately, consistently, and with a clear purpose. Every controversial moment was designed to achieve something specific, to challenge an assumption, to introduce a new perspective, to validate an experience that the audience might be having in secret and in shame. The show was not being controversial for its own sake. It was being controversial because the truths it wanted to tell required controversy. Because the easy truths, the comfortable truths, the truths that everyone already agrees on, are not the truths that change how you see the world. The truths that change how you see the world are the ones that make you uncomfortable. They are the ones that challenge your assumptions, question your certainties, and force you to consider perspectives you have never considered before. They are the truths that get you banned in the Middle East, and censored in Australia, and debated on parenting forums, and analyzed in academic papers. They are the truths that a blue cartoon cat spent 6 seasons telling, quietly, carefully, with humor and warmth, and an unshakable faith that his audience could handle whatever he had to say. There is a passage in the psychologist Alice Miller's book, The Drama of the Gifted Child, that has stayed with me. Miller writes that the greatest gift a parent can give a child is not protection from the world. It is the confidence that the child can handle the world, that they are strong enough, smart enough, resilient enough to face whatever comes, that they do not need to be shielded. They need to be trusted. This is the gift that the Amazing World of Gumball gave its audience. Not protection. Not sanitization. Not the comfortable lie that the world is simple and safe and that everything will always be okay. It gave them trust. The trust that they could handle the truth about gender. The trust that they could handle the truth about sexuality. The trust that they could handle the truth about death and violence and economic inequality and institutional failure and the constructed nature of reality itself. And the audience proved that trust was warranted. They grew up. They became thoughtful, critical, empathetic adults who carry the lessons of a cartoon blue cat with them into a world that desperately needs those lessons. They learned to question authority. They learned to think for themselves. They learned that being different is not a flaw. They learned that the world is complicated and that simplicity is not always virtue. They learned these things from a show that was willing to get banned for teaching them. And that, more than any individual episode or moment or scene, is the most controversial thing about the Amazing World of Gumball. Not its content, but its faith. Its absolute, unwavering, and thoroughly justified faith in the intelligence, the resilience, and the worthiness of its audience. That faith was controversial because it was rare, because most institutions, most media, most adults do not have it. They look at young people and see fragility. Gumball looked at young people and saw strength, and it was right. Let me add one more thing before we close, because it is something I keep coming back to, and I think it might be the most important thing I have to say about this show. The Amazing World of Gumball was created in an era of increasing cultural polarization. The years between 2011 and 2019 saw the rise of social media outrage, of cancel culture, of political tribalism, of a world that was increasingly divided into us and them, right and wrong, acceptable and unacceptable. In this environment, the safest thing for a children's show to do was nothing. To avoid controversy entirely. To stay in the safe center, telling simple stories with simple morals that could not possibly offend anyone. Many shows made this choice, and many of them were perfectly fine. They entertained their audiences. They did no harm. They played it safe. Gumball did not play it safe. It waded into controversial territory with its eyes open and its heart on its sleeve. It depicted gender fluidity in countries where gender fluidity was illegal. It satirized religious belief in cultures where religious criticism was dangerous. It explored sexuality in markets where sexuality was taboo. It challenged authority in systems that demanded obedience. It did all of this knowing that it would be censored, knowing that episodes would be banned, knowing that parents would complain, and critics would object, and networks would cut scenes, and entire storylines would be lost in certain markets. And it did it anyway, because the show's creators understood something that the censors did not. That the risk of controversy is always smaller than the cost of silence. That a show that says nothing offensive also says nothing important. That the measure of a work of art is not how many people it pleases, but how many people it changes. Gumball changed people, millions of them. It changed how they think about gender, how they think about authority, how they think about mental health, how they think about the nature of reality, and the meaning of existence. It changed how they see themselves and how they see the world. It did all of this through comedy, through animation, through 11-minute episodes broadcast on a channel primarily watched by children. And the controversy, all of it, every banned episode, and censored scene, and concerned parental email, is evidence that the change was real. You do not censor something that does not matter. You do not ban something that has no power. The fact that the Amazing World of Gumball was considered dangerous is proof that it was doing exactly what art is supposed to do. It was making people see things they had not seen before, feel things they had not felt before, think thoughts they had not thought before. It was, in the truest and deepest sense of the word, enlightening. The Enlightenment philosopher Immanuel Kant defined enlightenment as the emergence from self-imposed immaturity. Immaturity, for Kant, was not a matter of age. It was a matter of thinking. The immature person lets others think for them. They accept the judgments of authorities, institutions, and traditions without questioning them. The enlightened person thinks for themselves. They examine their own assumptions. They question their own beliefs. They take responsibility for their own understanding of the world. Gumball spent 6 seasons encouraging its audience to think for themselves, to question authorities, to examine assumptions, to look beneath surfaces, to resist being told what to think and what to feel and what to believe. It created millions of tiny Kantian enlightenments, millions of moments where a young person watching a cartoon about a blue cat suddenly saw something they had not seen before, suddenly understood something they had not understood before, suddenly realized that the world was more complex, more strange, and more interesting than they had been told. These moments cannot be measured. They do not appear in ratings data or advertising metrics or censorship reports. But they are real, and they are perhaps the most important thing that any piece of media has ever accomplished. The Amazing World of Gumball was controversial. It was banned. It was censored. It was criticized and debated and questioned, and it was right. Good night. Sleep well. And remember, the moments that made us uncomfortable are the moments that made us think. The banned episodes are not the show's mistakes. They are its victories. They are proof that a cartoon about a blue cat had the courage to say what needed to be said. Every generation needs art that makes it uncomfortable. Every generation needs stories that challenge the assumptions it has inherited and refuses to examine. Every generation needs a voice that says, "Look at this. Look at what you are not seeing. Look at what you are pretending is not there." For a generation of young people growing up in the second decade of the 21st century, that voice belonged to a blue cartoon cat. A cat who lived in a town called Elmore. A cat who had a goldfish for a brother, and a balloon for a classmate, and a piece of toast for a neighbor. A cat who existed in a world so strange, and so diverse, and so thoroughly, gloriously unusual, that it made the real world, with all its rigid categories and unexamined assumptions, look strange by comparison. The Amazing World of Gumball was not the first children's show to push boundaries. It was not the most boundary-pushing show in the history of animation, but it might be the most consistently, thoughtfully, and purposefully controversial show ever aimed at a young audience. Every controversy had a reason. Every banned episode had a lesson. Every uncomfortable moment was designed to produce not discomfort for its own sake, but the kind of productive discomfort that precedes growth. The show trusted its audience to grow from that discomfort, and its audience did. They are growing still. They are carrying the lessons of a banned cartoon into a world that needs those lessons more than ever. They are questioning authority because a cartoon taught them that authority deserves to be questioned. They are accepting difference because a cartoon showed them that difference is beautiful. They are thinking for themselves because a cartoon gave them permission to think. And they are doing all of this while the censors are still trying to figure out how a show about a blue cat managed to change so many minds. The answer is simple. It told the truth. And the truth, however controversial, however uncomfortable, however inconvenient for the powers that prefer silence, has a way of getting through, even when the world was not ready to hear it. But let us continue, because there are more controversial moments that deserve our attention. And each one reveals something new about the show's courage and its commitment to honesty. The episode The Tape from Season 2 is structured as a home video made by the Watterson family, and it includes a segment that parodies the style of internet creepypasta stories. The animation becomes deliberately crude and disturbing. The tone shifts from comedic to genuinely unsettling. Characters behave in ways that violate the internal logic of the show, creating a sense of wrongness that is difficult to describe but impossible to ignore. This segment was cut from several international broadcasts, but its existence is significant. It demonstrates that Gumball was aware of, and engaging with, internet horror culture at a time when most children's shows were pretending the internet did not exist. The creepypasta parody acknowledged that children were already consuming this kind of content online, often without parental knowledge or supervision. Rather than pretending this reality did not exist, Gumball met it head-on, providing a controlled, contextual encounter with internet horror culture that allowed young viewers to process it within the safety of a familiar show. The episode The Flower from Season 2 depicted jealousy as a literal parasite that grows inside Gumball's body. The visualization is striking and uncomfortable. A green plant emerges from Gumball's body, distorting his appearance and controlling his behavior. He becomes aggressive, irrational, and destructive, all while the flower inside him grows larger and more powerful. This body horror metaphor for emotional experience was censored in some markets for its intensity, but the metaphor is powerful precisely because it is uncomfortable. Jealousy does feel like something growing inside you. It does feel like a foreign organism that has taken control of your body and your thoughts. By making this feeling visible and physical, the show gave its young audience a way to externalize and examine an emotion that is, for most people, deeply private and deeply shameful. The philosopher Baruch Spinoza argued that emotions become less powerful when we understand them clearly, that the act of examining an emotion, naming it, and understanding its causes reduces its hold on us. This is essentially what the flower does. It takes the private, shameful experience of jealousy and turns it into something visible, something that can be examined and discussed. And in doing so, it reduces jealousy's power. It transforms it from an invincible internal force into a manageable external problem. The episode The Countdown from Season 3 is controversial for a different reason entirely. It is an episode about death, not implied death, not metaphorical death. Actual, permanent, irreversible death. Gumball and Darwin die in this episode. Repeatedly. They die and are sent back in time, only to die again, and again, and again. The episode treats death with a casualness that is both hilarious and deeply disturbing. Death is presented not as a singular, tragic event, but as a routine occurrence, something that happens constantly and that the characters barely react to. This normalization of death could be read as desensitizing, and some critics made exactly this argument. But it could also be read as honest, because death is normal. It is the most normal thing in the world. Everything that lives will die, and the cultural taboo against discussing death, especially with children, does not protect children from this reality. It merely ensures that they will encounter it unprepared. The psychologist Irvin Yalom has written extensively about death anxiety and its role in human psychology. Yalom argues that much of our anxiety, our depression, and our neurotic behavior stems from our refusal to confront the reality of death. We build elaborate psychological defenses to avoid thinking about mortality, and those defenses, while temporarily effective, prevent us from living fully. The person who has confronted their own mortality, who has looked death in the face and accepted it, is paradoxically more alive than the person who has spent their life running from it. The countdown forces its audience to confront death, not in a heavy, somber after-school special way, in a funny way, in a way that says, yes, this is real. Yes, this is scary. And also, it is kind of absurd, isn't it? The fact that we are all going to die is, when you really think about it, one of the most ridiculous things about being alive. This combination of honesty and humor is Gumball's signature move. It takes the things that are most difficult to talk about: death, jealousy, gender, sexuality, institutional failure, the constructed nature of reality, and it talks about them with a lightness that makes them bearable. It does not minimize them. It does not dismiss them. It simply refuses to treat them as sacred, untouchable topics that can only be discussed in hushed, reverent tones. This refusal is itself the most controversial thing about the show, because our culture treats certain topics as inherently serious, as things that demand gravity and solemnity. Death is serious. Sexuality is serious. Identity is serious. And they are. But they are also funny. They are also absurd. They are also part of the strange, ridiculous, beautiful experience of being alive. And a show that acknowledges all of these dimensions simultaneously, that refuses to choose between gravity and levity, is a show that is telling the truth about what it means to be human in a way that most media is too afraid to attempt. The episode The Compilation from Season 5 is structured as a viral video compilation, mimicking the format of YouTube content. It is one of the show's most direct engagements with digital media culture, and it raises questions about attention, authenticity, and the way we consume content in the internet age. The episode presents a series of short, disconnected segments designed to mimic the rapid-fire, dopamine-driven structure of online video content. Characters perform stunts, pranks, and dramatic moments that are designed not to tell a story, but to generate reactions. The result is a portrait of a culture that has replaced narrative with spectacle, depth with sensation, and meaning with clicks. The episode also functions as a critique of attention itself. In a world where attention is the primary currency, where every platform, every show, every creator is competing for the limited resource of human awareness, the question of how we spend our attention becomes a moral question. Not just a personal one, a moral one. The philosopher Simone Weil argued that attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. To give someone your attention, truly and completely, is to honor them, to acknowledge their existence, to say, you matter enough for me to stop everything else and be present with you. The compilation inverts this. It presents a world where attention is scattered, fragmented, distributed across dozens of competing stimuli. No single story gets enough attention to be meaningful. No single character gets enough time to become real. Everything is surface. Everything is fleeting. Everything is designed to be consumed and discarded in the time it takes to scroll to the next thing. For young viewers who are growing up in this attention economy, who have never known a world where content was not competing for their awareness at every moment, this episode provides a crucial counter-narrative. It shows them what the world looks like when attention is fragmented beyond repair. And it implicitly argues that the opposite, sustained, focused, generous attention is both more difficult and more valuable. The show itself modeled this kind of attention throughout its run. Each episode asked its audience to pay attention to details, to callbacks, to layered jokes that only made sense if you were fully present. The show rewarded attention in a way that most children's media does not, building a loyal audience that watched episodes multiple times, discovering new layers with each viewing. This is perhaps the most subversive thing Gumball did. In an economy that profits from distraction, it taught its audience to pay attention. In a culture that rewards superficial engagement, it rewarded deep engagement. In a world that reduces everything to likes and shares and clicks, it created something that could only be fully appreciated through the kind of sustained, generous attention that the attention economy is designed to prevent. The episode The Copycats from Season 5 tackled intellectual property and plagiarism through the arrival of a family that is an obvious knockoff of the Wattersons. They look similar. They sound similar. They do similar things. But they are not the same. They are copies. And the difference between an original and a copy, though subtle, is profound. The episode is partly a reference to a real Chinese animated show that was widely considered a knockoff of Gumball. But it transcends its specific inspiration to ask broader questions about originality, imitation, and the nature of creativity. What makes something original? Is it possible to own an idea? When does inspiration become theft? And what is lost when a copy is treated as the same as the original? These are questions that are particularly relevant for a generation that lives immersed in remix culture, where memes are shared and altered and reshared until the original source is untraceable. The line between creation and curation, between making and copying, between authorship and collaboration, has never been blurrier. And Gumball explored this blurriness with the honesty and humor that characterized its approach to every difficult subject. The episode does not condemn copying outright. It acknowledges that all creation involves some degree of imitation, but it also insists that there is a difference between influence and theft, between learning from someone and stealing from them, between being inspired by a work and replacing it. This distinction matters, the episode argues, because it is the distinction between a culture that values creativity and a culture that merely exploits it. This is controversial because it is a children's show critiquing the very mode of content consumption that most children's shows are designed to exploit. Cartoon Network, the network that airs Gumball, makes money from attention. Its business model depends on keeping young viewers watching for as long as possible. And here is one of its shows arguing, explicitly, that the attention economy is corrosive and dehumanizing. The fact that this episode was allowed to air at all is remarkable. It is the equivalent of a fast food restaurant putting up a sign that says, "Our food is unhealthy." The show used its platform to critique the platform itself, and it did so with such humor and intelligence that the critique was received as entertainment rather than as rebellion. Let us also talk about the show's treatment of race and cultural difference, because while Gumball does not depict race in the traditional human sense, its characters exist in a world of extreme visual and cultural diversity. And the show's handling of that diversity was not always uncontroversial. The citizens of Elmore are made of different materials. They are animated in different styles. They have different physical capabilities and limitations. A paper bear and a balloon and a piece of toast are expected to coexist in the same society, attend the same school, and follow the same rules. This is, obviously, absurd. A balloon has different needs than a paper bear. A piece of toast experiences the world differently than a cactus. The rules that govern one cannot possibly apply equally to all. And yet, the society of Elmore pretends otherwise. It applies the same standards to everyone, regardless of their fundamental nature. The school teaches the same curriculum to a super intelligent bunny and a sentient piece of chewing gum. The workplace expects the same productivity from a dinosaur and a cloud. The legal system applies the same laws to beings whose physical realities are incompatible. This is, without the show ever saying so explicitly, a commentary on the way our own society handles diversity. We claim to treat everyone equally while building systems that are designed for a specific kind of person. We apply the same standards to people with fundamentally different needs, capabilities, and experiences. And when those people fail to meet standards that were never designed for them, we blame them rather than questioning the standards. Gumball depicts this dynamic with a clarity that is sometimes uncomfortable. The absurdity of applying uniform standards to radically different beings is funny, but it is also recognizable. Anyone who has felt that the rules were not designed for them, anyone who has struggled to fit into a system that does not accommodate their particular way of being in the world, will recognize themselves in Elmore's citizens. There is a particular episode, The Others from Season 4, that makes this point with devastating precision. In it, Gumball discovers that there are characters in Elmore whose lives are governed by a different genre than his own. While Gumball lives in a comedy, these characters live in a teen drama, complete with realistic problems, genuine emotional pain, and consequences that do not resolve at the end of 11 minutes. Gumball tries to help these characters by applying the logic of his own genre to their problems. He cracks jokes. He suggests wacky solutions. He He treats their suffering with the lightness that works in his own life. And it does not work. Their problems are real in a way that Gumball's problems are not. Their pain cannot be solved with a punchline. This episode is controversial because it exposes the limitations of the show itself. It admits that comedy, for all its power, cannot address everything. That some forms of suffering require a different response. That the light, funny, self-aware approach that defines Gumball is not a universal solvent. Some things are simply too painful to be made funny. This is an extraordinary act of self-awareness for any show, but especially for a comedy. It is the show admitting its own inadequacy, admitting that there are problems it cannot solve, pain it cannot alleviate, experiences it cannot fully capture. And in admitting this, paradoxically, it gains a credibility that uncritical self-confidence could never provide. We trust Gumball more because it is honest about what it cannot do. We take its comedy more seriously because it knows when comedy is not enough. The Amazing World of Gumball was never just a controversial show. It was an honest show, and honesty, by its nature, is controversial. Because honesty means saying things that people do not want to hear. It means depicting realities that people would rather ignore. It means trusting your audience with truths that make them uncomfortable, and believing that the discomfort is valuable rather than harmful. Every controversial moment in Gumball, every banned episode, every censored scene, every raised eyebrow, and concerned editorial is evidence that the show was doing its job. It was telling the truth about the world. And the world, as it so often does, responded by trying to silence the messenger. But the truth has a way of persisting. The banned episodes are still out there, shared and discussed and analyzed by a community of viewers who recognize their value. The censored scenes have been documented and preserved by fans who understood that what was being hidden was worth seeing. The controversial themes have entered the cultural conversation, shaping the way a generation thinks about gender, identity, authority, and the constructed nature of reality. There is one more area of controversy that deserves extended examination, and it is the show's treatment of mental health. The Amazing World of Gumball did not shy away from depicting mental health struggles. Characters experience depression, anxiety, obsessive behavior, and existential dread. And the show depicted these experiences not as plot devices or after-school special topics, but as ordinary, ongoing aspects of its characters' lives. Nicole Watterson's anger issues were a recurring theme throughout the series. Nicole's rage is not played purely for laughs. It is depicted as a genuine problem, one that damages her relationships, frightens her family, and leaves her feeling ashamed and out of control. The show traces the roots of this rage to Nicole's childhood, to the pressures placed on her by her parents, to the accumulated frustration of a brilliant woman who has sacrificed her ambitions for her family. Nicole's anger episodes are among the most visually spectacular in the series. When Nicole loses her temper, the animation shifts dramatically. She moves with superhuman speed. She destroys objects and environments. She transforms from a suburban mother into something closer to an anime warrior, her rage manifesting as literal physical power that dwarfs anything else in the show. These sequences are exhilarating to watch, but they are also deeply uncomfortable because the destruction is real within the show's logic. Nicole causes genuine damage. She frightens her family, and afterward, there is always a moment of shame, a moment where she looks at what she has done and feels the weight of having lost control. The show never romanticizes Nicole's anger. It shows it as both powerful and destructive, both justified and harmful. This ambivalence is the key to the show's honesty. In real life, anger is never simply good or simply bad. It is complex. It is contradictory. It is both the energy that drives change and the force that destroys relationships. And Gumball holds both sides of this contradiction without choosing between them. The episode The Fury from Season 4 revealed that Nicole was once a martial arts prodigy, trained from childhood to fight by her mother. Her extraordinary physical abilities are not a cartoon exaggeration. They are the result of a lifetime of training that began before she could choose whether she wanted it. Her anger is not just a personality trait. It is a legacy. It was instilled in her by a parent who valued strength over gentleness, competition over compassion. This backstory transforms our understanding of Nicole's anger. It is no longer just an individual psychological issue. It is a generational pattern. Nicole's mother gave her daughter the tools of violence and called them gifts. Nicole uses those tools in her own life, sometimes to protect her family, sometimes to harm them. And the question the show asks is whether it is possible to break a pattern that was installed before consciousness. Whether the things our parents gave us, however well-intentioned, can be examined, questioned, and if necessary, refused. This is a remarkably honest portrayal of anger, and it is particularly significant because the angry character is a mother. Mothers in children's media are typically depicted as patient, nurturing, and emotionally stable. The angry mother is a trope that exists primarily in horror and drama. By making Nicole's anger a central part of a comedy, Gumball normalized an experience that millions of mothers have, but that few are given permission to acknowledge. The philosopher Audre Lorde wrote that anger is loaded with information and energy. That anger, properly understood, is not a flaw, but a resource. It tells us that something is wrong. It provides the energy to change what is wrong. The problem is not anger itself, but the suppression of anger, which turns a potentially constructive force into a destructive one. Nicole's anger is suppressed. She suppresses it because she is a mother, and mothers are not supposed to be angry. She suppresses it because she is a woman, and women are not supposed to be aggressive. She suppresses it until it explodes, in moments of extraordinary physical destruction, that the show plays for comedy, but that carry a genuine emotional weight. For young viewers, watching Nicole's anger is both thrilling and validating. Thrilling because Nicole's rage is genuinely powerful. She is one of the most physically formidable characters in the show. Validating because it says that anger is a real emotion, experienced by real people, even by the people who are supposed to have everything under control. Darwin's emotional sensitivity is another form of mental health portrayal that the show handled with unusual care. Darwin feels everything deeply. He cries easily. He worries constantly about his relationships. He experiences rejection as a form of existential threat. He is, by the standards of traditional masculinity, excessively emotional. And the show never, not once in 6 seasons, suggests that Darwin should be less emotional. It never frames his sensitivity as a weakness. It never implies that he should toughen up, or man up, or stop being so sensitive. It treats his emotional openness as a genuine strength, as the quality that makes him the moral center of the show, and the best friend anyone could ask for. This refusal to pathologize male emotional expression is quietly revolutionary. For boys growing up in a culture that still, despite decades of progress, punishes male vulnerability, seeing a character like Darwin being celebrated rather than mocked for his emotional openness is profoundly important. The show also depicted social anxiety through the character of Gumball himself. Gumball's constant fear of embarrassment, his obsessive concern with how others perceive him, his tendency to catastrophize social situations, all of these are recognizable symptoms of social anxiety. And the show depicts them with a warmth and a humor that normalizes the experience without minimizing it. The episode The Cringe from Season 5 is a masterful depiction of social anxiety in action. Gumball and Hot Dog Guy keep running into each other in awkward situations, and each encounter becomes more excruciating than the last. The comedy is derived entirely from the shared experience of social discomfort, from the knowledge that everyone has had moments like these, moments where every possible action seems wrong, and the only option is to endure. For viewers who experience social anxiety, this episode is therapeutic in the truest sense of the word. It says, this thing that you feel, this crippling awareness of being watched and judged and found wanting, this is universal. Everyone feels it. And it is, when viewed from the right angle, hilarious. Not because your suffering is funny, but because the human capacity for self-consciousness is, in its extremity, one of the most absurd things about being alive. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard described anxiety as the dizziness of freedom. We are anxious, Kierkegaard argued, not because the world is threatening, but because we are free. The awareness that we could choose differently, that we could embarrass ourselves, that we could be judged and found wanting. This awareness is the source of our anxiety, and it is also the source of our humanity. Only beings who are free can be anxious, and only beings who are anxious can be fully alive. Gumball depicts this existential anxiety with more accuracy and more compassion than most media aimed at any age group. It takes the universal human experience of self-consciousness and treats it with the seriousness it deserves, even while mining it for comedy. And in doing so, it provides its young audience with a framework for understanding their own anxiety that is more honest, more useful, and more humane than anything a textbook or a therapy session could offer. The episode The Choices, which we have discussed in other contexts, also functions as a meditation on the mental health consequences of regret. Nicole's exploration of the lives she might have lived is not just a philosophical exercise. It is a depiction of a specific psychological experience, the experience of looking back at your life and wondering if you made the right decisions. This experience is universal, but it is also potentially devastating. Unchecked, it can lead to depression, to paralysis, to the inability to appreciate what you have because of the consuming awareness of what you gave up. The show acknowledges the pain of this experience without offering false comfort. It does not say that Nicole made the right choice. It does not say that everything worked out for the best. It says that she made a choice, and that choice had consequences. And those consequences include both the family she loves and the lives she will never live. Both of these truths are real. Both of them matter. And the task of living is to hold them both simultaneously, without letting either one destroy the other. This is, for a children's cartoon, an extraordinarily mature and nuanced treatment of a complex psychological reality. And it is one more example of the show's fundamental commitment to honesty, even when honesty is uncomfortable, even when it would be easier to offer reassurance, even when the truth is something that most people, adults and children alike, would prefer not to face. Gumball lost the battle against censorship. Many of its most important episodes were banned or altered beyond recognition. But it won the war, because the ideas it introduced into the minds of millions of young viewers cannot be unintroduced. The questions it asked cannot be unasked. The truths it told cannot be untold. And that, perhaps, is the most controversial thing of all. Not what the show said, but the fact that it cannot be unsaid. Good night. Sleep well. And remember that the things worth saying are often the things that make the world nervous. Let us return now to some specific episodes that generated controversy, not through any single objectionable moment, but through their overall willingness to go places that children's television traditionally avoids. The episode The Money from Season 5 depicts the Watterson family running out of money. This premise, common enough in sitcoms, becomes something extraordinary in Gumball's hands. As the family's finances dwindle, the world around them begins to lose its production values. The animation simplifies. Colors become less vibrant. Characters lose their details. Objects disappear. Music stops. The show is literally dismantling itself as a visual representation of poverty. By the end of the episode, the Wattersons exist in a nearly blank world, their cartoon reality reduced to the barest possible elements. It is both a comedy about financial stress and a devastating metaphor for what poverty actually does to a person's experience of the world. When you have nothing, the world becomes less colorful, less detailed, less rich. Poverty is not just the absence of money, it is the absence of fullness. This is a controversial depiction because it makes poverty visible in a way that most media avoids. Most shows about poverty focus on the emotional aspects, the stress, the shame, the family conflicts. Gumball shows the perceptual aspects, how poverty changes what you see, what you hear, what you experience, how the world literally becomes less when you have less. For young viewers, many of whom have experienced financial stress in their own families, this metaphor is powerful and validating. It says, "We see what you are going through. We understand that it is not just about money. It is about your entire experience of reality. And we are willing to depict that experience honestly, even though it makes people uncomfortable." The episode The Disaster and its sequel, The Rerun from Season 4, constitute perhaps the most emotionally intense experience in the entire series. In these episodes, Rob obtains a universal remote control that allows him to manipulate reality itself. He uses it to rewind, fast forward, pause, and delete moments from the lives of the Watterson family. The implications are terrifying. Rob can erase a moment of happiness, and the people who experienced it will never know it existed. He can rewind a conversation and change its outcome. He can pause a character in a moment of vulnerability and leave them frozen there indefinitely. The remote is, in effect, the power of God, and Rob uses it with the precision and cruelty of a being who has been profoundly wronged. These episodes were not banned, but they generated significant discussion among parents and critics who felt that the emotional intensity was inappropriate for the show's target audience. Characters experience genuine despair. Gumball watches helplessly as his family is manipulated by a force he cannot resist. The stakes feel real in a way that they rarely do in children's animation. But the resolution of these episodes contains one of the show's most important philosophical statements. Gumball gains control of the remote and faces a choice. He can use it to create a perfect life, preventing all pain and suffering. Or he can destroy it and accept reality as it is, imperfect and painful and uncertain. He destroys the remote. He chooses the real world. He chooses suffering over simulation, imperfection over perfection, freedom over safety. And in doing so, he articulates a philosophical position that most adults struggle to reach. That the value of life is not found in the absence of pain, but in the freedom to experience all of it, the good and the bad, the beautiful and the terrible, the joyful and the heartbreaking. This is not a message that children are typically exposed to. The standard message of children's media is that everything will be okay, that problems have solutions, that if you are good enough and brave enough and try hard enough, everything will work out in the end. Gumball says something different. It says that everything will not always be okay, that some problems do not have solutions, that trying hard is not always enough, and that this reality, painful as it is preferable to the alternative, which is a controlled, sanitized, artificial existence in which nothing bad ever happens, but nothing real ever happens either. The episode The Shippening from Season 6 tackled fan fiction and the concept of fan ownership of fictional characters. In the episode, a magical notebook falls into the possession of Sarah, a character who writes fan fiction about the other characters. Whatever she writes in the notebook becomes reality. Characters are forced into romantic pairings they did not choose. Personalities are altered to fit the narratives that Sarah wants to tell. The entire social fabric of Elmore is rewritten according to the desires of a single fan. The episode is hilarious, but it is also deeply uncomfortable. It raises real questions about the relationship between creators and audiences. Who owns a fictional character? The person who created them? The network that broadcasts them? Or the fans who love them? When fans write stories about characters, are they engaging in a harmless creative exercise? Or are they appropriating something that does not belong to them? These are not abstract questions. In the era of social media and fan culture, they are among the most contested questions in contemporary entertainment. Fans feel genuine ownership of the characters they love. They believe they have a right to reimagine those characters in their own image. And when creators push back against this, when they insist that the characters belong to their original vision rather than to the collective imagination of the fan base, genuine conflict results. The Shippening does not resolve this conflict. It simply depicts it with characteristic honesty and humor, and trusts the audience to draw their own conclusions. The episode was controversial precisely because it did not take a side. It showed the creative joy of fan fiction and the violation of having your identity rewritten by someone else. It showed the empowerment of fandom and the tyranny of fandom. It held both truths simultaneously and refused to choose between them. The episode The Diet from Season 5 explored body image and fatness in a way that was unusual for children's television. Richard Watterson, who is significantly overweight, is encouraged by his family to lose weight. The episode follows his diet and exercise regime, which is presented as both well-intentioned and deeply flawed. What makes the episode controversial is that it does not present Richard's weight loss as unambiguously positive. It acknowledges the health arguments for weight loss, but it also depicts the emotional damage that diet culture can inflict. Richard's sense of identity is tied to his body. When his body changes, his identity changes. And the show asks whether a thinner Richard is actually a happier Richard, or whether the desire for thinness is itself a form of cultural pressure that has nothing to do with actual well-being. This is a nuanced and important message for young viewers, many of whom are already absorbing messages about body size, diet, and the moral value of thinness from the culture around them. The episode does not tell them that being overweight is healthy, but it does tell them that a person's weight does not determine their value. That diet culture can be harmful as well as helpful. That the relationship between body size and happiness is far more complicated than most media acknowledges. The episode The Console from Season 4 is an extended parody of role-playing video games that also functions as a satire of the way games structure our experience of the world. Characters are assigned stats, levels, and abilities. They undertake quests with clearly defined objectives and rewards. The messiness of real life is replaced by the clean, logical structure of a game. The episode is funny because the game logic is absurd when applied to real life. But it is also unsettling because the game logic is seductive. Characters enjoy having clear objectives, measurable progress, and guaranteed rewards. They prefer the game world to the real world because the game world makes sense. It has rules. It has fairness. It has a system. This is a commentary on gamification, on the way that game mechanics are increasingly being applied to non-game contexts like education, employment, and social interaction. It is also a commentary on the human desire for order and predictability, and the way that desire can lead us to prefer simulated experiences over real ones. For young viewers who spend significant portions of their lives in game environments, this message is both relevant and challenging. It asks them to consider whether the structured, predictable, rewarding world of games is a supplement to reality or a substitute for it. And it does so without condemning games, which it clearly loves and respects, but with an honest awareness that the line between supplement and substitute is thinner than most people realize. The episode The Disaster from Season 4, which we have already discussed, contains a moment that is worth examining separately. When Rob uses the remote to rewind time, he erases a moment in which Gumball and Penny share a genuine, tender exchange. The moment is deleted from existence. Gumball and Penny will never know it happened. They will never remember the tenderness they shared. It is gone, completely and irreversibly. This is, for a children's show, an extraordinarily cruel scene, not because anyone is physically hurt, but because something precious is stolen, and the victims do not even know what they have lost. It is the cruelty of ignorance, the cruelty of not knowing what has been taken from you. And this connects to a broader philosophical point about the nature of memory and experience. If a moment of happiness is erased from your memory, did it still happen? If you love someone, and that love was deleted from your consciousness, did you still love them? What is the relationship between experience and memory? And which one is more real? These are questions that philosophers have debated for centuries. The philosopher John Locke argued that personal identity is constituted by memory. If you do not remember an experience, it is, in a meaningful sense, no longer yours. You are only the sum of what you remember. But the philosopher Thomas Reid pushed back, arguing that memory is unreliable and that identity must be grounded in something deeper than recollection. We are more than our memories. We are the beings who have those memories, even when the memories themselves are lost. Gumball does not resolve this debate, but it stages it with a precision and an emotional intensity that would be impressive in any medium. The fact that it does so in a children's cartoon, using a magical remote control and a vengeful background character as its philosophical instruments, is simply extraordinary. The show's final episode, The Inquisition, generated more controversy than perhaps any other episode in the series. Not because of its content, which is relatively mild by the standards of the show's later seasons. But because of its ending, the episode ends on a cliffhanger. The characters are being transformed. The world is changing. Something enormous and irreversible is happening. And then the screen cuts to black. The end. No resolution. No explanation. No comfort. For many viewers, this ending was infuriating. They had invested 6 seasons and 8 years in these characters. They loved them. They cared about what happened to them. And the show refused to tell them. But for other viewers, the ending was perfect. It was the ultimate act of trust. The show was saying, "We have given you everything you need. Now it is your turn." What happens next is up to you. The story continues in your imagination, in your conversations with other fans, in the meaning you create from what we have given you. We are not going to do that work for you. You are ready to do it yourself. This is controversial because it violates the implicit contract between a show and its audience. The contract says, "We will tell you a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end." Gumball honored the first 2 parts of that contract, and then, deliberately and provocatively, broke the third. It refused to end, not because it could not, but because it chose not to. Because it believed that an unresolved ending was truer to its own philosophy than a resolved one. And that philosophy, the philosophy that has run through every controversial moment we have discussed tonight, is simple. The world is messy. The truth is complicated. Easy answers are usually wrong. And the best thing we can do for each other, adults and children alike, is to be honest about all of this. Even when honesty is uncomfortable, even when it gets us banned, even when the world is not ready to hear it. The Amazing World of Gumball made the world nervous for 6 seasons, and the world is better for it.